So, just a reminder that Baal worship started in Mesopotamia with the storm god Adad, later becoming prominent in Canaanite and Phoenician cultures around the 14th to 13th centuries BCE. So, we're going to go ahead and get into the Canaanite people and religion. So, Canaan was an ancient Semitic speaking civilization and region of the southern Levant during the late 2nd millennium BC. Canaan had significant geopolitical importance in the late Bronze Age Amarna period, 14th century BC, as the area where the spheres of interest of the Egyptian, Hittite, Mitanni, and Assyrian empires converged or overlapped. Much of present-day knowledge about Canaan stems from archaeological excavation in this area at sites such as Tel Hazor, Tel Megiddo, En Eser, and Gezer. The name Canaan appears throughout the Bible as a geography associated with the Promised Land. The demonym Canaanites serves as an ethnic catch-all term covering various indigenous populations, both settled and nomadic pastoral groups throughout the regions of the southern Levant. It is by far the most frequently used ethnic term in the Bible. Biblical scholar Mark Smith, citing archaeological findings, suggests that the Israelite culture largely overlapped with and derived from Canaanite culture. In short, Israelite culture was largely Canaanite in nature. The name Canaanites is attested many centuries later as the endonym of the people later known to the ancient Greeks from circa 500 BC as Phoenicians, and after the immigration of Phoenicians and Canaanite speakers to Carthage, founded in the 9th century BC, was also used as a self-designation by the Punics or Kanani or Shanani of North Africa during late antiquity. Etymology. The English term Canaan, pronounced Canaan or Canaan, since circa 1500 due to the great vowel shift, comes from the Hebrew Canaan via the Koine Greek Zavav Canaan and the Latin Canaan. It appears as Kenana, Canadian Kanaana, in Amarna letters, 14th century BC, and several other ancient Egyptian texts. In Greek, it first occurs in the writings of Hecataeus, circa 550 to 476 BC, as Kana. It is attested in Phoenician on coins from Berytus dated to the 2nd century BC. The etymology is uncertain. An early explanation derives the term from the Semitic root kn, to be low, humble, subjugated. Some scholars have suggested that this implies an original meaning of lowlands, in contrast with Aram, which would then mean highlands, whereas others have suggested it meant the subjugated as the name of Egypt's province in the Levant, and evolved into the proper name in a similar fashion to Provincia Nostra, the first Roman colony north of the Alps, which became province. An alternative suggestion put forward by Ephraim Avigdor Spicer in 1936 derives the term from Hurrian Kenahu, purportedly referring to the color purple, so that Canaan and Phoenicia would be synonyms, land of purple. Tablets found in the Hurrian city of Nuzi in the early 20th century appear to use the term Kenanu as a synonym for red or purple dye, laboriously produced by the Kassite rulers of Babylon from murex mollusk as early as 1600 BC, and on the Mediterranean coast by the Phoenicians from a byproduct of glassmaking. Purple cloth became a renowned Canaanite export commodity, which is mentioned in Exodus. The dyes may have been named after their place of origin. The name Phoenicia is connected with the Greek word for purple, apparently referring to the same product, but it is difficult to state with certainty whether the Greek word came from the name or vice versa. The purple cloth of Tyre in Phoenicia was well known far and wide and was associated by the Romans with nobility and royalty. However, according to Robert Drews, Spizer's proposal has generally been abandoned. Jahi, Djahy, retinue, anglicized retinue, was the usual ancient Egyptian name for Canaan and Syria, covering the region from Gaza in the south to Tartus in the north. Its borders shifted with time, but it generally consisted of three regions. The region between Ascalon and the Lebanon, stretching inland to the Sea of Galilee, was named Djahy, which was approximately synonymous with Canaan. History and archaeology. There are several periodization systems for Canaan. One of them is the following. Prior to 4500 BC, prehistory, Stone Age, hunter-gatherer societies slowly giving way to farming and herding societies. 4500 through 3500 BC, the Chalcolithic, early metalworking and farming. 3500 through 2000 BC, early bronze, prior to written records in the area. 2000 to 1550 BC, the Middle Bronze Age with city-states. 1550 through 1200 BC, the Late Bronze and Egyptian hegemony. 1200 through various dates by region, the Iron Age. After the Iron Age, the periods are named after the various empires that ruled the region: Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Hellenistic, related to Greece, and Roman. Canaanite culture developed in situ from multiple waves of migration merging with the earlier Circum-Arabian nomadic pastoral complex, which in turn developed from a fusion of their ancestral Natufian and Harifian cultures with pre-pottery Neolithic B, PPNB farming cultures practicing animal domestication during the 6200 BC climatic crisis, which led to the Neolithic Revolution / First Agricultural Revolution in the Levant. The majority of Canaan is covered by the eastern Mediterranean conifer sclerophyllous broadleaf forest ecoregion. The Chalcolithic, 4500 through 3500 BC. The first wave of migration, called Gausulian culture, entered Canaan circa 4500 BC. This is the start of the Chalcolithic in Canaan. From their unknown homeland, they brought an already complete craft tradition of metalwork. They were expert coppersmiths, and their work is similar to artifacts from the later Makop culture, leading some scholars to believe they represent two branches of an original metalworking tradition. Their main copper mine was at Wadi Fainan. The copper was mined from the Cambrian Burge dolomite shale unit in the form of the mineral malachite. All of the copper was smelted at sites in Beersheba culture. Genetic analysis has shown that the Gausulians belonged to the West Asian haplogroup M184. The end of the Chalcolithic period saw the rise of the urban settlement of En-Isur on the southern Mediterranean coast. Early Bronze Age, 3500 through 2000 BC. By the early Bronze Age, other sites had developed, such as Ebla, where an East Semitic language, Eblaite, was spoken, which by circa 2300 BC was incorporated into the Mesopotamia-based Akkadian Empire of Sargon the Great and Naram Sin of Akkad. Biblical Akkad, ACCAD. Sumerian references to the Martu, tent dwellers, later Amuru, or Amorite country west of the Euphrates River date from even earlier than Sargon, at least to the reign of the Sumerian king Enshakushana of Uruk. And one tablet credits the early Sumerian king Lugul and Mundu with holding sway in the region, although this tablet is considered less credible because it was produced centuries later. Amorites at Hazor, Kadesh, Qadesh on the Orontes, and elsewhere in Amuru or Syria bordered Canaan in the north and northeast. Ugarit may be included among these Amoritic entities. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire in 2154 BC saw the arrival of peoples using Kerbet Karik ware or pottery, coming originally from the Zagros Mountains in modern Iran, east of the Tigris. In addition, DNA analysis revealed that between 2500 and 1000 BC, populations from the Chalcolithic Zagros and Bronze Age Caucasus migrated to the southern Levant. The first cities in the southern Levant arose during this period. The major sites were in Isur and Megiddo. These Proto-Canaanites were in regular contact with the other peoples to their south, such as Egypt, and to the north, Asia Minor, which include the Hurrians, Hattians, Hittites, Luwians, then Mesopotamia, which include Sumer, Akkad, and Assyria, a trend that continued through the Iron Age. The end of the period is marked by the abandonment of the cities and a return to lifestyles based on farming villages and semi-nomadic herding, although specialized craft production continued and trade routes remained open. Archaeologically, the late Bronze Age state of Ugarit at Ras Shamra in Syria is considered quintessentially Canaanite, even though its Ugaritic language does not belong to the Canaanite language group proper. A disputed reference to a lord of Ganana in the Semitic Ebla tablets dated 2350 BC from the archive of Tel Marduk has been interpreted by some scholars to mention the deity Dagon by the title Lord of Canaan. If correct, this would suggest that Eblaites were conscious of Canaan as an entity by 2500 BC. Jonathan Tubb states that the term Ganana may provide a third millennium reference to Canaanite, while at the same time stating that the first certain reference is in the 18th century BC. See Ebla Biblical Controversy for further details. Middle Bronze Age, 2000 through 1550 BC. Urbanism returned and the region was divided among small city-states, the most important of which seems to have been Hazor. Many aspects of Canaanite material culture now reflected a Mesopotamian influence, and the entire region became more tightly integrated into a vast international trading network. As early as Naram Sin of Akkad's reign, circa 2240 BC, Amuru was called one of the four quarters surrounding Akkad, along with Subartu, Assyria, Sumer, and Elam. Amorite dynasties also came to dominate in much of Mesopotamia, including in Larsa, Isin, and founding the state of Babylon in 1894 BC. Later on, Amuru became the Assyrian/Akkadian term for the interior of South as well as for northerly Canaan. At this time, the Canaanite area seemed divided between two confederacies, one centered upon Megiddo in the Jezreel Valley, the second on the more northerly city of Kadesh on the Orontes River. An Amorite chieftain named Sumu Abum founded Babylon as an independent city-state in 1894 BC. One Amorite king of Babylonian, Hammurabi, 1792 through 1750 BC, founded the first Babylonian Empire, which lasted only as long as his lifetime. Upon his death, the Amorites were driven from Assyria but remained masters of Babylonia until 1595 BC, when they were ejected by the Hittites. The semi-fictional story of Senu describes an Egyptian officer, Senu, conducting military activities in the area of Upper Retjenu and Finiku during the reign of Senusret I, circa 1950 BC. The earliest bona fide Egyptian report of a campaign to Mentu, Retjenu, and Shechem is the Sebek-ku Stele, dated to the reign of Senusret III, circa 1862 BC. A letter from Mut-Bisir to Shamshi-Adad I, circa 1809 through 1776 BC of the Old Assyrian Empire, 2025 through 1750 BC, has been translated. It is in Rahisam that the Brigands, Habitum, and the Canaanites, or Kenanum, are situated. It was found in 1973 in the ruins of Marai, an Assyrian outpost at that time in Syria. Additional unpublished references to Kenanum in the Marai letters refer to the same episode. Whether the term Kenanum refers to people from a specific region or rather people of foreign origin has been disputed, such that Robert Drews states that the first certain cuneiform reference to Canaan is found on the Alalak statue of King Idrimi. A reference to Amaya being in the land of Canaan is found on the statue of Idrimi, 16th century BC, from Alalak in modern Syria. After a popular uprising against his rule, Idrimi was forced into exile with his mother's relatives to seek refuge in the land of Canaan, where he prepared for an eventual attack to recover his city. The other references in the Alalak text are West Asian visitors to Egypt, circa 1900 BC. At 154, unpublished. At 181, a list of Apiru people with their origins, all are towns except for Canaan. At 188, a list of Muskenu people with their origins, all are towns except for 3 lands, including Canaan. At 48, a contract with a Canaanite hunter. Around 1650 BC, Canaanites invaded the eastern Nile Delta, where, known as the Hyksos, they became the dominant power. In Egyptian inscriptions, Amar and Amoru, or Amorites, are applied strictly to the more northerly mountain region east of Phoenicia, extending to the Orontes. Archaeological excavations of a number of sites later identified as Canaanite show that prosperity of the region reached its apogee during this Middle Bronze Age period under the leadership of the city of Hazor, at least nominally tributary to Egypt for much of the period. In the north, the cities of Yamkad and Qatna were hegemons of important confederacies, and it would appear that biblical Hazor was the chief city of another important coalition in the south. Later Bronze Age, 1550 through 1200 BC. In the early late Bronze Age, Canaanite confederacies centered on Megiddo and Kadesh before being fully brought into the Egyptian Empire and Hittite Empire. Later still, the Neo-Assyrian Empire assimilated the region. According to the Bible, the migrant ancient Semitic-speaking peoples who appear to have settled in the region included, among others, the Amorites, who had earlier controlled Babylonia. The Hebrew Bible mentions the Amorites in the Table of Peoples, Book of Genesis 10 and 16 through 18a. Evidently, the Amorites played a significant role in the early history of Canaan. In Book of Genesis, chapter 14, verse 7, Book of Joshua, chapter 10, verse 5, Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verses 19, 27, and 44, we find them located in the southern mountain country, while verses such as Book of Numbers chapter 21 verse 13, Book of Joshua chapter 9 verse 10, chapter 24 verse 8 and 12, etc., tale of two great Amorite kings residing at Heshbon and Ashtaroth east of the Jordan. Other passages, including the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 16, chapter 48, verse 22, book of Joshua, chapter 24, verse 15, book of Judges, chapter 1, verse 34, regard the name Amorite as synonymous with Canaanite. The name Amorite is, however, never used for the population on the coast. In the centuries preceding the appearance of the biblical Hebrews, parts of Canaan and southwestern Syria became tributary to the Egyptian pharaohs, although domination by the Egyptians remained sporadic and not strong enough to prevent frequent local rebellions and intercity struggles. Other areas, such as northern Canaan and northern Syria, came to be ruled by the Assyrians during this period. Under Thutmose III, 1479 through 1426 BC, and Amenhotep II, 1427 through 1400 BC, the regular presence of the strong hand of the Egyptian ruler and his armies kept the Amorites and Canaanites sufficiently loyal. Nevertheless, Thutmose III reported a new and troubling element in the population. Habiru, or in Egyptian, Apiru, are reported for the first time. These seem to have been mercenaries, brigands, or outlaws who may have at one time led a settled life, but with bad luck or due to the force of circumstances, contributed a rootless element to the population, prepared to hire themselves to whichever local mayor, king, or princeling would pay for their support. Although Habiru Sagaz, a Sumerian ideogram glossed as brigand in Akkadian, and sometimes Habiri, an Akkadian word, had been reported in Mesopotamia from the reign of the Sumerian king Shulgi or Shulgai of III. Their appearance in Canaan appears to have been due to the arrival of a new state based in Asia Minor to the north of Assyria and based upon a Marianu aristocracy of horse-drawn charioteers associated with the Indo-Aryan rulers of the Hurrians known as Mitanni. The Habiru seem to have been more a social class than an ethnic group. One analysis shows that the majority were Hurrian, although there were a number of Semites and even some Kassite and Luwian adventurers among their number. The reign of Amenhotep III, as a result, was not quite so tranquil for the Asiatic province, as Habiru/Apiru contributed to greater political instability. It is believed that turbulent chiefs began to seek their opportunities, although as a rule they could not find them without the help of a neighboring king. The boldest of the disaffected nobles was Aziru, son of Abdi Ashurta, who endeavored to extend his power into the plain of Damascus. Akizi, governor of Katna or Qatna near Hamath, reported this to Amenhotep III, who seems to have sought to frustrate Aziru's attempts. In the reign of the next pharaoh, Akhenaten, reigned circa 1352 to circa 1335 BC, both father and son caused infinite trouble to loyal servants of Egypt, like Rib-Haddah, governor of Gubla or Jebel, by transferring their loyalty from the Egyptian crown to the Hittite Empire under Suppiluliuma I, reigned circa 1344 through 1322 BC. Egyptian power in Canaan thus suffered a major setback when the Hittites or Hattai advanced into Syria in the reign of Amenhotep III, and when they became even more threatening in that of his successor, displacing the Amorites and prompting a resumption of Semitic migration. Abdi Ashurta and his son Aziru, at first afraid of the Hittites, afterwards made a treaty with their king, and joining with the Hittites, attacked and conquered the districts remaining loyal to Egypt. In vain did Rib-Haddah send touching appeals for aid to the distant pharaoh, who was far too engaged in his religious innovations to attend to such messages. The Amarna letters tell of the Habiri in northern Syria. Etekama wrote thus to the Pharaoh. Behold, Nam-Yawaza has surrendered all the cities of the king, my lord, to the Sagas in the land of Kadesh and in Ubi. But I will go, and if thy gods and thy son go before me, I will bring back the cities to the king, my lord, from the Habiri, to show myself subject to him, and I will expel the Sagas. Similarly, Zimrida, king of Sidon, named Sidona, declared, all my cities which the king has given into my hand have come into the hand of the Habiri. The king of Jerusalem, Abdi-Heba, reported to the Pharaoh, if Egyptian troops come this year, lands and princes will remain to the king, my lord. But if troops come not, these lands and princes will not remain to the king, my lord. Abdi-Heba's principal trouble arose from the persons called Lil-Kili and the sons of Labiah, who are said to have entered into a treasonable league with the Habiri. Apparently, this restless warrior found his death at the siege of Jena. All these princes, however, maligned each other in their letters to the Pharaoh and protested their own innocence of traitorous intentions. Nam-Yawaza, for instance, whom Etekama accused of disloyalty, wrote thus to the Pharaoh, behold, I and my warriors and my chariots, together with my brethren and my sagas and my suti, 9 are at the disposal of the royal troops to go whithersoever the king my lord commands. Around the beginning of the New Kingdom period, Egypt exerted rule over much of the Levant. Rule remained strong during the 18th dynasty, but Egypt's rule became precarious during the 19th and 20th dynasties. Ramses II was able to maintain control over it in the stalemated battle against the Hittites at Kadesh in 1275 BC. But soon thereafter, the Hittites successfully took over the northern Levant, Syria, and Amuru. Ramses II, obsessed with his own building projects while neglecting Asiatic contacts, allowed control over the region to continue dwindling. During the reign of his successor Merneptah, the Merneptah Stele was issued, which claimed to have destroyed various sites in the southern Levant, including a people known as Israel. Egypt's withdrawal from the southern Levant was a protracted process lasting some 100 years, beginning in the late 13th century BC and ending close to the end of the 12th century BC. The reason for Egypt's withdrawal was most likely political turmoil in Egypt proper rather than the invasion by the Sea Peoples, as there is little evidence that the Sea Peoples caused much destruction circa 1200 BC. Many Egyptian garrisons or sites with an Egyptian governor's residence in the southern Levant were abandoned without destruction, including Deir al-Balah, Ascalon, Tel Mor, Tel El Farah, the south, Tel Gerasa, Tel Jemma, Tel Mesos, and Kubur el Waleda. Not all Egyptian sites in the southern Levant were abandoned without destruction. The Egyptian garrison at Afek was destroyed, likely in an act of warfare at the end of the 13th century. The Egyptian gate complex uncovered at Jaffa was destroyed at the end of the 12th century between 1134 through 1115 based on C14 dates, while Beth Shean was partially, though not completely, destroyed, possibly by an earthquake in the mid-12th century. Amarna letters. References to Canaanites are also found throughout the Amarna letters of the pharaoh Akhenaten circa 1350 BC. In these letters, some of which were sent by governors and princes of Canaan to their Egyptian overlord Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV in the 14th century BC, are found beside Amar and Amuru, or Amorites. The two forms Kenahi and Kenani, corresponding to Kena and Canaan, respectively, and including Syria in its widest extent, as Edward Meyer has shown. The letters are written in the official and diplomatic East Semitic Akkadian language of Assyria and Babylonia, though Canaanitish words and idioms are also in evidence. The known references are EA 8, letter from Berna Buriash II to Akhenaten, explaining that his merchants were detained in Canaan for business matters, robbed and killed in Hinatuna of the land of Canaan by the rulers of Acre and Shamhuna, and asked for compensation because Canaan is your country. EA 9, letter from Berna Buriash II to Tutankhamun, all the Canaanites wrote to Kurigalsu, saying, "Come to the border of the country so we can revolt and be allied with you." EA 30, letter from Tushrata to the kings of Canaan, "Provide my messenger with safe entry into Egypt." EA 109, letter of Rib Hadda, previously on seeing a man from Egypt, the kings of Canaan fled before him, but now the sons of Abdi Ashurta make men from Egypt prowl about like dogs. EA 110, letter of Rib Hadda, no ship of the army is to leave Canaan. EA 131, letter of Rib Hadda, if he does not send archers, they will take Byblos, and all the other cities and the lands of Canaan will not belong to the king. May the king ask Yanhamu about these matters. EA 137, letter of Rib Hadda, if the king neglects Byblos of all the cities of Canaan, not one will be his. EA 367, Hanai, son of Mareah, chief of the stable of the king in Canaan. EA 162, letter to Aziru, you yourself know that the king does not want to go against all of Canaan when he rages. EA 148, letter from Abimelech to the Pharaoh, the king has taken over the land of the king for the Apiru. May the king ask his commissioner who is familiar with Canaan. EA 151, letter from Abimelech to the Pharaoh. The king, my lord, wrote to me, write to me what you have heard from Canaan. Abimelech describes and responds what has happened in eastern Cilicia, or Danuna, the northern coast of Syria, or Ugarit in Syria, or Kodesh, Amuru, and Damascus, as well as in Sidon. Other Late Bronze Age mentions. Text RS 20.182 from Ugarit is a copy of a letter of the king of Ugarit to Ramses II concerning money paid by the sons of the land of Ugarit to the foreman of the sons of the land of Canaan, or KN apostrophe NY, looks like Kenny. According to Jonathan Tubb, this suggests that the people of Ugarit, contrary to much modern opinion, considered themselves to be non-Canaanite. The other Ugarit reference, KTU 4.96, shows a list of traders assigned to royal estates, one of the estates having 3 Ugaritans, an Ashdodite, an Egyptian, and a Canaanite. Asher tablets. A Middle Assyrian letter during the reign of Shalmaneser I includes a reference to the travel to Canaan of an Assyrian official. Hattusa letters. 4 references are known from Hattusa. An evocation to the cedar gods includes reference to Canaan alongside Sidon, Tyre, and possibly Amuru. KBO, 28:1, Ramesses II letter to Hattusili III, in which Ramesses suggested he would meet his brother in Canaan and bring him to Egypt. KUB 3 and 57, broken text which may refer to Canaan as an Egyptian sub-district. KBO 115 plus 19, Ramesses II, letter to Hattusili III, describing Ramesses' visit to the land of Canaan on his way to Kenza and Harita. The Bronze Age collapse. Anne Killebrew has shown that cities such as Jerusalem were large and important walled settlements in the pre-Israelite Middle Bronze and the Israelite Iron Age period, circa 1800 through 1550 and circa 720 through 586 BC. But that during the intervening Late Bronze and Iron Age 1 and ages, sites like Jerusalem were small and relatively insignificant and unfortified towns. Just after the Amarna period, a new problem arose, which was to trouble the Egyptian control of southern Canaan, the rest of the region then being under Assyrian control. Pharaoh Horemheb campaigned against Shashu, Egyptian, meaning wanderers, nomadic pastoralist tribes who had moved across the Jordan River to threaten Egyptian trade through Galilee and Jezreel. Seti I, circa 1290 BC, is said to have conquered these Shasu, Semitic-speaking nomads living just south and east of the Dead Sea, from the fortress of Taru, or Shatir, to Canaan. After the near collapse of the Battle of Kadesh, Ramesses II had to campaign vigorously in Canaan to maintain Egyptian power. Egyptian forces penetrated into Moab and Ammon, where a permanent fortress garrison called simply Ramesses was established. Some believe the Habiru signified generally all the nomadic tribes known as Hebrews, and particularly the early Israelites of the period of the Judges, who sought to appropriate the fertile region for themselves. However, the term was rarely used to describe the Shasu. Whether the term may also include other related ancient Semitic-speaking peoples, such as the Moabites, Ammonites, and Edomites, is uncertain. There is little evidence that any major city or settlement in the southern Levant was destroyed around 1200 BC. At Lachish, the false temple 3 was ritually terminated, while a house in Area S appears to have burned in a house fire, as the most severe evidence of burning was next to 2 ovens, while no other part of the city had evidence of burning. After this, though, the city was rebuilt in a grander fashion than before. For Megiddo, most parts of the city did not have any signs of damage, and it is only possible that the palace in Area AA might have been destroyed, though this is not certain. While the monumental structures at Hazor were indeed destroyed, this destruction was in the mid-13th century BC, long before the end of the Late Bronze Age began. However, many sites were not burned to the ground around 1200 BC, including Ascalona, Ashdod, the ancient city, Tel as-Safi, Tel Batash, Tel Burna, Tel Dor, Tel Gerasa, Tel Gemma, Kerbet Rabud, Tel Zaror, and Tel Abu Hawam, among others. Despite many theories which claim that trade relations broke down after 1200 BC in the southern Levant, there is ample evidence that trade with other regions continued after the end of the Late Bronze Age in the southern Levant. Archaeologist Jesse Millick has shown that while the common assumption is that trade in Cypriot and Mycenaean pottery ended around 1200 BC, trade in Cypriot pottery actually largely came to an end at 1300, while for Mycenaean pottery, this trade ended at 1250 BC, and destruction around 1200 BC could not have affected either pattern of international trade since it ended before the end of the Late Bronze Age. He has also demonstrated that trade with Egypt continued after 1200 BC. Archaeometallurgical studies performed by various teams have also shown that trade in tin, a non-local metal necessary to make bronze, did not stop or decrease after 1200 BC, even though the closest sources of the metal were from Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, or perhaps even Cornwall, England. Lead from Sardinia was still being imported to the southern Levant after 1200 BC during the early Iron Age. The Iron Age. By the early Iron Age, the southern Levant came to be dominated by the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, besides the Philistine city-states on the Mediterranean coast, and the kingdoms of Moab, Ammon, and Aram Damascus east of the Jordan River, and Edom to the south. The northern Levant was divided into various petty kingdoms, the so-called Syro-Hittite states and the Phoenician city-states. The entire region, including all Phoenician/Canaanite and Aramaean states, together with Israel, Philistia, and Samaria, was conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire during the 10th and 9th centuries BC, and would remain so for 300 years until the end of the 7th century BC. Emperor kings such as Ashurbanipal, Adad Nirari II, Sargon II, Tiglath-Pileser III, Esarhaddon, Sennacherib, and Ashurbanipal came to dominate Canaanite affairs. During the 25th dynasty, the Egyptians made a failed attempt to regain a foothold in the region, but were vanquished by the Neo-Assyrian Empire, leading to an Assyrian conquest of Egypt. Between 616 and 605 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire collapsed due to a series of bitter civil wars, followed by an attack by an alliance of Babylonians, Medes, and Persians, and the Scythians. The Neo-Babylonian Empire inherited the western part of the empire, including all the lands in Canaan and Syria. They successfully defeated the Egyptians and remained in the region in an attempt to regain a foothold in the Near East. The Neo-Babylonian Empire itself collapsed in 539 BC, and the region became a part of the Achaemenid Empire. It remained so until in 332 BC it was conquered by the Greeks under Alexander the Great, later to fall to the Roman Empire in the late 2nd century BC, and then Byzantium until the Arab conquest in the late 7th century AD. Egyptian hieroglyphic and hieratic, 1500 through 1000 BC. During the 2nd millennium BC, ancient Egyptian texts used the term Canaan to refer to an Egyptian-ruled colony whose boundaries generally corroborate the definition of Canaan found in the Hebrew Bible, bounded to the west by the Mediterranean Sea, to the north in the vicinity of Hamath in Syria, to the east by the Jordan Valley, and to the south by a line extended from the Dead Sea to around Gaza. Nevertheless, the Egyptian and Hebrew uses of the term are not identical. The Egyptian text also identified the coastal city of Kadesh in northwest Syria near Turkey as part of the land of Canaan, so that the Egyptian usage seems to refer to the entire Levantine coast of the Mediterranean Sea, making it a synonym of another Egyptian term for this coastland, Ret Janu. Lebanon in northern Canaan, bordered by the Litani River to the watershed of the Orontes River, was known by the Egyptians as Upper Ret Janu. In Egyptian campaign accounts, the term Dajahi was used to refer to the watershed of the Jordan River. Many earlier Egyptian sources also mention numerous military campaigns conducted in Canaan, just inside Asia. Archaeological attestation of the name Canaan in ancient Near Eastern sources relates almost exclusively to the period in which the region operated as a colony of the New Kingdom of Egypt, 16th through 11th centuries BC, with usage of the name almost disappearing following the Late Bronze Age collapse, circa 1206 through 1150 BC. The references suggest that during this period the term was familiar to the region's neighbors on all sides, although scholars have disputed to what extent such references provide a coherent description of its locations and boundaries, and regarding whether the inhabitants used the term to describe themselves. 16 references are known in Egyptian sources from the 18th dynasty of Egypt onwards. Amenhotep II inscriptions, Canaanites are included in a list of prisoners of war. 3 topographical lists, Papyrus Anastasi I, 27, 1 inch refers to the route from Sel to Gaza, the foreign countries of the end of the land of Canaan. The Merneptah Stele, Papyrus Anastasi III A, 5 through 6, and Papyrus Anastasi 4, 16 and 4 refer to Canaanite slaves from Huru. Papyrus Harris, after the collapse of the Levant under the so-called peoples of the sea, Ramesses III, circa 1194 BC, is said to have built a temple to the god Amen to receive tribute from the southern Levant. This was described as being built in Canaan, a geographical reference whose meaning is disputed, with suggestions that it may refer to the city of Gaza or to the entire Egyptian occupied territory in the southwest corner of the Near East. Greco-Roman historiography. The Greek term Phoenicia is first attested in the first 2 works of Western literature, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. It does not occur in the Hebrew Bible, but occurs 3 times in the New Testament in the book of Acts. In the 6th century BC, Hecataeus of Miletus affirms that Phoenicia was formerly called Zava, a name that Philo of Byblos subsequently adopted into his mythology as his eponym for the Phoenicians. Canaan, who was afterwards called Phoenix, or looks like Phoenix, quoting fragments attributed to Sanchuniathon, he relates that Byblos, Berytus, and Tyre or Tyre were among the first cities ever built under the rule of the mythical Kronos, and credits the inhabitants with developing fishing, hunting, agriculture, shipbuilding, and writing. Coins of the city of Beirut/Laodicea bear the legend of Laodicea, a metropolis in Canaan. These coins are dated to the reign of Antiochus IV, 175 through 164 BC, and his successors until 123 BC. St. Augustine also mentions that one of the terms the seafaring Phoenicians called their homeland was Canaan. Augustine also records that the rustic people of Hippo in North Africa retained the Punic self-designation Shanani or Kanani. Since Punic in Latin also meant non-Roman, some scholars, however, argue that the language referred to as Punic in Augustine may have been Libyan. The Greeks also popularized the term Palestine, named after the Philistines or the Aegean Pelasgians, for roughly the region of Canaan, excluding Phoenicia, with Herodotus's first recorded use of Palestine circa 480 BC. From 110 BC, the Hasmoneans extended their authority over much of the region, creating a Judean, Samaritan, Idumean, Iturian, Galilean alliance. The Judean Jewish, or Ludaio, control over the wider area resulted in it also becoming known as Judea. a term that had previously only referred to the smaller region of the Judean mountains, the allotment of the tribe of Judah and heartland of the former kingdom of Judah. Between 73 and 63 BC, the Roman Republic extended its influence into the region in the Third Mithridatic War, conquering Judea in 63 BC and splitting the former Hasmonean kingdom into 5 districts. Around 130 through 135 AD, as a result of the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the province of Judea was joined with Galilee to form a new province of Syria-Palestina. There is circumstantial evidence linking Hadrian with the name change, although the precise date is not certain, and the interpretation of some scholars that the name change may have been intended to complete the disassociation with Judea is disputed. Later sources. Pataset's statue is the last known Egyptian reference to Canaan, a small statuette labeled Envoy of the Canaan and of Pileset. Pataset, the son of Api or Api. The inscription is dated to 900 to 850 BC, more than 300 years after the preceding known inscription. During the period circa 900 through 330 BC, the dominant Neo-Assyrian and Achaemenid Empire make no mention of Canaan. Canaanites. The Canaanites were the inhabitants of ancient Canaan, a region that roughly corresponds to present-day Israel and Palestine, western Jordan, southern and coastal Syria, Lebanon, and continued up to the southern border of Turkey. They are believed to have been one of the oldest civilizations in human history. History. The Levant was inhabited by people who referred to the land as Canaan as early as the mid-3rd millennium BC. The Akkadian word Kenahu referred to the purple-colored wool dyed from the murex mollusk of the coast, which was a key export of the region. When the ancient Greeks later traded with the Canaanites, this meaning of the word seems to have predominated, as they referred to the Canaanites as Phoenix or Phoenicians, which may derive from the Greek language word phoenix, translated as crimson or purple, and also described the cloth for which the Greeks traded. The word phoenix was transcribed by the Romans to ponis. The descendants of the Canaanite settlers in Carthage were likewise referred to as Punic. Thus, while Phoenician and Canaanite refer to the same culture, archaeologists and historians commonly refer to the Bronze Age pre-1200 BC Levantine peoples as Canaanites, while their Iron Age descendants, particularly those living on the coast, are referred to as Phoenicians. More recently, the term Canaanite has been used for the secondary Iron Age states of the Levantine interior that were not ruled by Aramaean peoples, that is, that were ruled by a separate and closely related ethnic group which included the Philistines and the Israelite kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Culture. According to archaeologist Jonathan N. Tubb, Ammonites, Moabites, Israelites, and Phoenicians undoubtedly achieved their own cultural identities, and yet ethnically they were all Canaanites, the same people who settled in farming villages in the region in the 8th millennium BC. There is uncertainty about whether the name Canaan refers to a specific Semitic-speaking ethnic group wherever they live, the homeland of this ethnic group, a region under the control of this ethnic group, or perhaps any combination of the three. Canaanite civilization was a response to long periods of stable climate interrupted by short periods of climate change. During these periods, Canaanites profited from their intermediary position between the ancient civilizations of the Middle East, ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, Babylonia, the Hittites, and Minoan Crete, to become city-states of merchant princes along the coast, with small kingdoms specializing in agricultural products in the interior. This polarity between coastal towns and agrarian hinterland was illustrated in Canaanite mythology by the struggle between the storm god, variously called Teshub, Hurrian, or Baal Hadad, Semitic Amorite or Aramaean, and Yah or Yam, god of the sea and rivers. Early Canaanite civilization was characterized by small, walled market towns surrounded by peasant farmers growing a range of local horticultural products, along with commercial growing of olives, grapes for wine, and pistachios, surrounded by extensive grain cropping, predominantly wheat and barley. Harvest in early summer was a season when transhumance nomadism was practiced. Shepherds staying with their flocks during the wet season and returning to graze them on the harvested stubble close to water supplies in the summer. Evidence of this cycle of agriculture is found in the Gezer calendar and in the biblical cycle of the year. Periods of rapid climate change generally saw a collapse of this mixed Mediterranean farming system. Commercial production was replaced with subsistence agricultural foodstuffs, and transhumance pastoralism became a year-round nomadic pastoral activity, whilst tribal groups wandered in a circular pattern north to the Euphrates or south to the Egyptian delta with their flocks. Occasionally, tribal chieftains would emerge, raiding enemy settlements and rewarding loyal followers from the spoils or by tariffs levied on merchants. Should the cities band together and retaliate, a neighboring state intervenes, or should the chieftain suffer a reversal of fortune, allies would fall away or intertribal feuding would return. It has been suggested that the patriarchal tales of the Bible reflect such social forms. Since 3100 BC, most Canaanites, particularly those that lived on the land that is now Israel or Palestine, lived in walled settlements in the plains and coastal regions. These settlements were surrounded by mud brick fortifications and agricultural hamlets, which the inhabitants relied on for food. In the second millennium BC, urban Canaanite elites ruled over rural and pastoral areas. The material culture of the city-states was relatively uniform. New burial customs were implicitly influenced by a belief in the afterlife. During the periods of the collapse of Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia and the first intermediate period of Egypt, the Hyksos invasions and the end of the Middle Bronze Age in Assyria and Babylonia, and the Late Bronze Age collapse, trade through the Canaanite area would dwindle as Egypt, Babylonia, and to a lesser degree Assyria withdrew into their isolation. When the climate stabilized, trade would resume firstly along the coast in the area of the Philistine and Phoenician cities. As markets redeveloped, new trade routes that would avoid the heavy tariffs of the coast would develop from Kadesh Barnea through Hebron, Lachish, Jerusalem, Bethel, Samaria, Shechem, Shiloh, through Galilee to Jezreel, Hazor, and Megiddo. Secondary Canaanite cities would develop in this region. Further economic development would see the creation of a third trade route from Elath, Timnah, Edom or Seir, Moab, Ammon, and thence to the Aramean states of Damascus and Palmyra. Earlier states, for example, the Philistines and Tyrians in the case of Judah and Samaria for the second route, and Judah and Israel for the third route, tried generously unsuccessfully to control the interior trade. Eventually, the prosperity of this trade would attract more powerful regional neighbors such as ancient Egypt, Assyria, the Babylonians, Persians, ancient Greeks, and Romans, who would control the Canaanites politically, levying tribute, taxes, and tariffs. Often in such periods, thorough overgrazing would result in a climatic collapse and a repeat of the cycle. PPNB, Gasulian, Uric, and the Bronze Age cycles already mentioned. The fall of later Canaanite civilization occurred with the incorporation of the area into the Greco-Roman world as how do you say it? Judah province with the I, and after Byzantine times into the Umayyad Caliphate. Western Aramaic, one of the two lingua francas of Canaanite civilization, is still spoken in a number of small Syrian villages, whilst Phoenician Canaanite dispersed as a spoken language in about 100 CE. A separate Akkadian-infused Eastern Aramaic is still spoken by the existing Assyrians of Iraq, Iran, northern Syria, and southeast Turkey. Tel Kabari contains the remains of a Canaanite city from the Middle Bronze Age, 2000 through 1550 BC. The city, the most important of the cities in the Western Galilee during that period, had a palace at its center. Tel Kabri is the only Canaanite city that can be excavated in its entirety because after the city was abandoned, no other city was built over its remains. It is notable because the predominant extra-Canaanite cultural influence is Minoan. Minoan-style frescoes decorate the palace. Significant figures. Figures mentioned in historiography or known through archaeology. Rulers of Ugarit: Amitamru the first of Ugarit, Nikmadu the second of Ugarit, Arhalba of Ugarit, Nikmepa of Ugarit, Amitamru the second of Ugarit, Ibiranu of Ugarit, Amurapi of Ugarit. Rulers of Tyre: Abibaal, Hiram the first, Baal Ether the first or Baalbazar the first, Abdastertus, Astaramis, Felis, Ithbaal the first, Baal Ether the second or Baalbazar the second, Matan the first, Pygmalion, Ithobaal the second, Hiram the second, Luli, Baal the first, Abar, Abdomen. Others: Aziru, ruler of Amuru, Labiah, lord of Shechem, Abdi-Heba, local chieftain of pre-Israelite Jerusalem or Jebus, Suwardata, king of the Canaanite city of Gath or mayor of Kiltu, Kronos, Ilus, founder of Byblos, according to the Sanchuniathon. Genetic studies. A 2017 study of 5 Canaanite skeletons found that approximately half of the skeletons' genes originated from agricultural settlers in the Levant around 10,000 years ago. The other half was from a population tied to Iran, which researchers estimate arrived in the Levant approximately 5,000 years ago. Hajj of 2018 revealed that when using HLA genes, Levantine Arabs such as Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, and Jordanians were closely related populations with common Canaanite ancestry. They shared a common geographic territory, which was later disrupted by 19th century British and French colonization. Their Canaanite ancestors came from North Africa or Arabian Peninsula via Egypt in 3300 BC and settled in the Levant lowlands after the Gasulian collapse in 3800 through 3550 BC. The Levantine Arabs were also related to East Mediterranean populations such as Turks, Greeks, and Cretans, Egyptians, and Iranians, which can be explained by the high migratory flow between Levantine subregions. However, Levantine Arabs were genetically distant from Arabian Peninsula populations such as Saudis, Kuwaitis, and Yemenis before the 7th century Islamic conquest. Agranat Tamir et al. 2020 stated that Canaanites from the Intermediate Bronze Age, circa 2500 through 2000 BC, to Late Iron Age 1, circa 1000 BC, were genetically similar to each other. They lived in modern Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, and could be modeled as a mixture of local earlier Neolithic populations and populations from the northeastern part of the Near East, or the Zagros Mountains, Caucasians/Armenians, and possibly Hurrians. Exceptions include the second millennium BC inhabitants of Sidon, Abel, Beth Maacah, and Ashkelon, who were relatively heterogeneous due to inflow from the eastern Mediterranean basin. The inhabitants of Baca and Jordan also have probable admixture from eastern desert groups. Following the Bronze Age, there was an addition of European-related and East African-related components, which were represented by late Neolithic and Bronze Age Europeans and Somalis from a north-south and south-north gradient, respectively. The majority of modern Jewish and Levantine Arabic-speaking groups have 50% or more ancestry from peoples who were related to Bronze Age Levantines and Chalcolithic Zagros groups. This does not mean that any of these present-day groups bear direct ancestry from people who lived in the Middle to Late Bronze Age Levant or in Chalcolithic Zagros. Rather, it indicates that they have ancestries from populations whose ancient proxy can be related to the Middle East. Al-Mari et al. 2021 stated that Levantines and Arabians diverged from each other before the Neolithic period, with Levantines adopting a sedentary agricultural lifestyle. In the Bronze Age, immigrants with ancient Iranian-related ancestry replaced about 50% of the local Levantine ancestry. They were believed to introduce haplogroup J1, which was not found in earlier Levantines. After the Bronze Age, Eastern Hunter-Gatherer, or EHG, ancestry was introduced, along with Southeast European and Anatolian ancestry. Anatolian ancestry is significantly higher in modern Levantines than Arabians. Lazaridis et al. 2022 clarified that ancient Levantines and their descendants exhibit a decrease of -8% local Neolithic ancestry, which is mostly Natufian, every millennium starting from the pre-pottery Neolithic to the medieval period. It was largely replaced by Caucasus-related and Anatolian-related ancestries from the north and west, respectively. However, despite the decline in the Natufian component, this key ancestry source made an important contribution to peoples of later periods, continuing until the present. In Jewish and Christian scriptures. Hebrew Bible. Canaan and the Canaanites are mentioned some 160 times in the Hebrew Bible, mostly in the Torah and the books of Joshua and Judges. They descended from Canaan, who was the son of Ham and the grandson of Noah. Canaan was cursed with perpetual slavery because his father Ham had looked upon the drunk and naked Noah. The expression look upon at times has sexual overtones in the Bible, as in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 11. The man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. As a result, interpreters have proposed a variety of possibilities as to what kind of transgression has been committed by Ham, including the possibility of castrating or raping his father or maternal incest. However, some believe that Canaan was the perpetrator of the crime based on the surrounding verses. According to the Table of Nations, Canaan was also the ancestor of other nations which were collectively considered to be Canaanite. Canaan is the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites or Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Later, the Canaanite clans scattered, and the borders of Canaan reached across the Mediterranean coast, from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then inland around the Jordan Valley toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. Genesis chapter 10, verses 15 through 19. Other passages in the Bible offer different lists of the exact names of the Canaanite tribes. For example, Genesis 15, chapter 15, verses 19 through 21 lists the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. In contrast, Exodus chapter 3 verse 8 only lists the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. How those other biblical lists of Canaanite tribes agree with the genealogical listing of Canaan's sons has been subject to much discussion. It has farther been argued that the biblical term Canaanite is actually synecdoche, referring to both the broader Canaanite nation and to a specific Canaanite tribe within that nation. Anne E. Killebrew states that the biblical ethnogenesis of Canaan is problematic because there is archaeological and linguistic evidence that suggests that the ancient Israelites were largely Canaanites themselves. In particular, they were a subset of Canaanite culture. Alternatively, other scholars have suggested that the Israelites originated from the Shasu and other semi-nomadic peoples from the desert regions south of the Levant, only later settling in the highlands of Canaan. It has been also suggested that the Hamitic origin myth could be a reference to Canaan's colonization by the Egyptians in the late Bronze Age, who were Hamites according to the Bible. Volker Fritz argues that there are also dissimilarities in the material culture of the early Israelites and Canaanites, suggesting that the new settlers were unrelated to the former inhabitants of the Canaanite cities. While Fritz agrees that there are some similarities between the two cultures, he argues that this resulted from close contact between them over a long period. In his view, cultural similarities developed when nomadic Israelites entered the land and gradually formed close economic relationships with Canaanites. The Israelites eventually became self-sufficient in the highlands, but retained aspects of the shared Canaanite material culture. Biblical scholar David Frankel argues that a narrative in the books of Chronicles tenuously indicates the historical reality of Israel's ethnogenesis. In his view, the text makes reference to an established Israelite presence in Canaan before Joshua's conquest, which primarily consisted of Ephraimites. According to the Bible, Canaan was located to the west of the Jordan River. The Canaanites were described as living by the sea and along by the side of the Jordan. Book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 29, and around Jordan in the book of Joshua 22, verse 9. More specifically, they inhabited the Mediterranean coastlands, Joshua chapter 5, verse 1, including Lebanon corresponding to Phoenicia, Isaiah chapter 23, verse 11, and the Gaza Strip corresponding to Philistia in Zephaniah chapter 2, verse 5, and the Jordan Valley, Joshua chapter 11, verse 3, Numbers chapter 13, verse 29, and Genesis chapter 13, verse 12. Numbers chapter 34, verses 3 through 12 provide even more specific boundaries, which covered territory that was considered to be small by ancient standards. John N. Oswald observes that Canaan consists of the land west of the Jordan and is distinguished from the area east of the Jordan. Oswald then goes on to say that in Scripture, Canaan takes on a theological character as the land which is God's gift and the place of abundance. Whilst the inhabitants of Canaan are called Canaanites, they are also called Amorites, similar to the citizens of the multi-ethnic Soviet Union being called Russian and Hittites or Hittites. Abraham, the ancestor of the Israelites, was most likely an Amorite Aramaean, according to some early theories. Conquest of Canaan. Yahweh promises the land of Canaan to Abraham in the book of Genesis and eventually delivers it to the descendants of Abraham, the Israelites. The Hebrew Bible describes the Israelite conquest of Canaan in the former prophets, the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. These books give the narrative of the Israelites after the death of Moses and their entry into Canaan under the leadership of Joshua. The renaming of the land of Canaan and as the land of Israel marks the Israelite conquest of the promised land. The Canaanites, modern Canaanim or Canaanim, are said to have been one of 7 nations driven out by the Israelites following the Exodus. The other nations were the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. One of the 613 commandments prescribes that no inhabitants of the cities of 6 Canaanite nations, the same as mentioned in chapter 7, verse 1, minus the Girgashites, were to be left alive in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 16. Kingdom of Israel and Judah. After the Israelite conquest of Canaan, Canaan existed as a cretarchy and later a monarchy. Under the Israelite monarchy, the Israelite tribes were united as one kingdom. However, it split into the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. In 738 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire conquered the kingdom of Israel. In 586 BC, the kingdom of Judah was annexed into the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The city of Jerusalem fell after a siege which lasted either 18 or 30 months. By 586 BC, much of Judah was devastated and the former kingdom suffered a steep decline of both economy and population. Significant figures, characters in the Bible. Canaan, son of Ham, Genesis 10, verse 6. Sidon, firstborn son of Canaan, Genesis 10, verse 15. Heth, son of Canaan, Genesis 10, verse 15. Sihon, king of Amorites, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 4. Og, king of Bashan, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 4. Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, Joshua 10, verse 1. Debir, king of Eglon, Joshua 10, verse 3. Jabin, name of 2 kings of Hazor, Joshua chapter 11, verse 1, and Judges chapter 5, verse 6. In the New Testament, Canaan or Canaan is used only twice in the New Testament, both times in Acts of the Apostles when paraphrasing Old Testament stories. Additionally, the derivative Canania or Canaanite woman is used in Matthew's version of the exorcism of the Syro-Phoenician woman's daughter, while the Gospel of Mark uses the term Syro-Phoenician. It is implied that the New Testament authors considered all non-Jewish inhabitants in the northern coastlines of Canaan to be Canaanite. In the King James Version of the Bible, one of the disciples is known as Simon the Canaanite. Uses of the name. By the Second Temple period, 530 BC through 70 AD, Canaanite in the Hebrew language had come to be not an ethnic designation so much as a general synonym for merchant, as it is interpreted in, for example, Book of Job 40, verse 30, or Book of Proverbs, chapter 31, verse 24. The name Canaanites is attested as the endonym of the people later known to the ancient Greeks from circa 500 BC as Phoenicians, and following the immigration of Canaanite speakers to Carthage, founded in the 9th century BC, was also used as a self-designation by the Punics, Canaanai, of North Africa during late antiquity. The Septuagint, 3rd and 2nd century BC, mostly renders Canaan as Zava'av or Canaan, but on 2 occasions as Phoenicia, in Exodus chapter 16, verse 35, and Joshua chapter 5, verse 12. The legacy. Canaan is used as a synonym of the promised land. For instance, it is used in this sense in the hymn, Canaan's Happy Shore, with the lines, "Oh, brothers, will you meet me?" 3 times on Canaan's Happy Shore, a hymn set to the tune later used in the Battle Hymn of the Republic. In the 1930s and 1940s, some revisionist Zionist intellectuals in Mandatory Palestine founded the ideology of Canaanism, which sought to create a unique Hebrew identity rooted in ancient Canaanite culture rather than a Jewish one. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion observed the contradictions between the secular and biblical records of Jewish indigeneity or indigeneity to Canaan, which was nonetheless affirmed in the Declaration of Independence. Whilst he used secular arguments to justify Jewish indigeneity, he argued that the biblical narrative of Abraham migrating to Canaan was a reunion with indigenous Hebrews who shared his theological belief. He also argued that not all Hebrews joined Jacob's family when they migrated to Egypt and later birthed the generation of the Hebrews that endured the Exodus. Some professors find this view tenable based on the 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 20 through 24, which preserved heterodox traditions of Jewish indigeneity.